A young girl vanished in 1986 after leaving home on roller skates, heading to a friend's house she never reached. Her parents did not realize she was missing until a friend called, asking if she still planned to come. By then it was already too late. She had disappeared without a trace. But 20 years later, her parents visited a small local market, and what the father saw in the window of an antique store made his blood run cold. The hazy golden afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of ancient fir and maple trees that lined the streets of Fern Creek, Oregon. It was 2 in the afternoon in the town, with its charming and perfectly preserved historic center buzzed with the quiet energy of its weekend market. The wooden stalls brimming with local crafts, artisanal cheeses, and the vibrant hues of freshly picked berries created a picturesque scene. Yet Robert Whitemore found no charm in it. He walked a few steps behind his wife Helen, frowning, with a familiar shroud of discontent resting heavily on his shoulders. "I still do not understand why we had come all the way out here, Helen," grumbled Robert in a voice low enough not to reach the cheerful vendors, but sharp enough for his wife to catch every syllable. 3 days. 3 days in the middle of nowhere looking at jam. Helen stopped beside a stall displaying handmade ceramics, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of a sky-blue bowl. She sighed a soft exhalation of patience, worn but still intact. "Robert, please, we already talked about this. It is a vacation, the first in, well, a very long time. Fern Creek is beautiful. Try to enjoy it, even just a little." It had taken years of gentle persuasion, of silent pleading, and tear-filled nighttime conversations for Helen to convince Robert to take this trip. Their home in Rockford, Illinois, had become a mausoleum of memories. Every room echoed with the absence of their daughter, Emily Grace Horry. Emily, their bright and lively 12-year-old girl, had disappeared 20 years earlier while skating to a friend's house on a sunny afternoon, swallowed by the ordinary, leaving behind a void of unanswered questions and endless sorrow. Since that devastating day in 1986, Robert had closed himself off in a shell of sadness. Joy was forgotten language, pleasure betrayal. He worked, ate, slept, but did not live. Each day was a monotonous cycle of searching, of wondering, of replaying those final moments in his mind. Helen, too, had borne the crushing weight of their loss. But in the past year, a fragile shift had occurred within her. The raw agony had begun to soften, replaced by a quiet understanding that they could not remain suspended in that abyss of misery forever. Emily would not have wanted that. She had tentatively started to suggest that they needed to find a way to move forward, to breathe again, even if their breaths always carried the scent of grief. This trip to Oregon, to a place far from the ghosts of their past, was a desperate attempt to draw Robert back toward the light, or at least away from the deepest shadows. As they wandered further down the main street, Robert's gaze, typically fixed on the ground or some distant, invisible point, caught on a facade across the way. It was an unremarkable place with faded green paint and a sign above the door that read timber treasures in whimsical, slightly peeling golden letters. The windows were crammed with a chaotic assortment of items. Tarnished silver, stacks of old books, a chipped porcelain doll, and what appeared to be a collection of oddly shaped tools. It was unmistakably a junky antique shop, the kind that seemed to hoard forgotten stories. Helen's eyes lit up. "Oh, look, Robert. That place looks interesting. You know how much I love vintage things. It reminds me of when we were younger." She pointed toward it with a hopeful smile. "Let us just go in for a moment." Robert's expression remained unmoved. "Go ahead. I will wait out here. All that dust and clutter is not for me." He reached into his pocket to retrieve his pack of cigarettes and lighter, the familiar ritual, a small and somber comfort. Helen's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "All right, I will not be long." She crossed the street with steps lighter than his and disappeared through the door of Timber Treasures, the bell above it jingling faintly. Robert leaned against a lamppost, the cigarette halfway to his lips. He was about to light it when his gaze, almost distractedly, drifted toward the shop's dusty window. His hand froze. His breath caught in his throat. There, nestled among a collection of faded jars and a headless mannequin torso placed atop a rough wooden shelf, was a pair of pink and blue roller skates. Battered, worn, the plastic showing her age and clearly child-sized. He blinked. thinking his mind was playing tricks on him, conjuring specters from the depths of his pain. But the image remained. Slowly he lowered his hand, forgetting the unlit cigarette. He stepped away from the lamppost and took a hesitant step, then another, until his face was nearly pressed against the dirty glass. They were unmistakably and heartbreakingly familiar. The specific shade of bubblegum pink on the boot, the vibrant turquoise of the frame and wheels, the thick purple straps. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Emily had had a pair exactly like those. No, not like those. Those. He had bought them for her 12th birthday. He remembered how her eyes had lit up, the pure and genuine joy when she put them on, wobbling at first, then gliding, a blur of color and laughter. The cigarette and lighter jingled back into his pocket. He did not think, he reacted. He flung open the shop door, making the bell ring violently, and strode in with large steps, scanning the dim interior until his gaze landed on a man with thinning hair and a tired expression standing behind a cluttered counter. Helen, who had been examining a display of antique radios near the back, turned around startled by his abrupt entrance. "Robert, what is wrong? Are you all right?" She hurried toward him, concern etched on her face. Robert ignored her for the moment, his attention fixed on the shopkeeper. "The skates," he said in a rasping, urgent voice. "In the window. I need to see them now." The shopkeeper frowned at his abrupt manner, but moved toward the window. "What is going on?" Helen asked. "Look," said Robert in a voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper returned with the skates and placed them on the counter. Helen's hand flew to her mouth when she saw them. Robert breathed. "They look so much like Emily's," completed Robert, stretching his trembling hands to pick up one of the skates. He turned it over in his hands, examining every detail. "Size 4. That's the size I bought her." Helen shook her head, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Robert, please, don't do this to yourself. There must be thousands of pairs like these. It's just a coincidence." But Robert wasn't listening. He turned the skates over and checked the bottom. There, engraved into plastic toe guard, were the initials E.G.W. Emily Grace Whitmore. He whispered, voice cracking, "I carved these myself, Helen. These are hers. These are Emily's skates." Helen's skepticism vanished when she saw the initials. She reached out and traced the letters with her fingertip, trembling. How is this possible? How did they end up here, thousands of miles from home? The shopkeeper, who had been listening to their exchange with growing interest, cleared his throat. "Is there a problem?" Robert looked up, his eyes intense. "These skates belong to our daughter. She disappeared 20 years ago while wearing them. Where did you get them?" The shopkeeper's demeanor changed instantly. He reached for the skates. "I'm sorry about your daughter, but these are no longer yours. If you want them, you'll have to pay the listed price." Robert stared at him in disbelief. "You don't understand. This is evidence. Our daughter was abducted while wearing these skates." "I don't care about the story you're telling," the shopkeeper replied coldly. "All I know is that these are inventory in my shop, and they're priced at $5. $45, corrected Robert. "That's robbery. I paid less than that for them brand new 20 years ago." "Inflation," the shopkeeper shrugged. "Besides, vintage items come with a premium these days." Helen placed a calming hand on Robert's arm. "Maybe we should just pay for them, Robert, no matter the cost." "No," said Robert firmly. "They're ours. They were stolen from us, just like our daughter was stolen. I won't pay for something that belongs to us." The shopkeeper's face hardened. "If you're not going to buy them, I'll have to ask you to leave." When Robert refused to move, the shopkeeper came around the counter and tried to physically guide them toward the door. Robert resisted, clutching the skates tightly to his chest. The commotion drew the attention of passers-by outside, and a uniformed police officer who had been patrolling the market approached the shop. He entered, surveying the scene with a trained eye. "What's going on here?" the officer asked. The shopkeeper pointed an accusing finger at Robert. "This man is trying to steal merchandise from my store." "I'm not stealing anything," Robert protested. "These skates belong to my daughter. She was wearing them when she disappeared 20 years ago in our hometown in Illinois." The officer looked skeptical. "Sir, if you have a claim to that property, There are proper legal channels to pursue. You can't just take them. Look, said Robert desperately, turning the skates over. See these initials? EGW Emily Grace Whitmore. My daughter. I carved them myself. And there's a product serial number here that would match the receipt I've kept all these years. The officer's expression shifted slightly as he examined the initials. He stepped back and spoke into his radio, requesting information about a missing person case in Illinois from 20 years ago. After a brief exchange, the officer's demeanor changed completely. He turned to Robert with newfound respect in his eyes. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize. The station confirms that there is indeed an open case that matches your description. He turned to the shopkeeper. I need to speak with the owner of this establishment. I'm just an employee, the shopkeeper said defensively. The owner's not in today. I'll need their contact information. The officer responded firmly. The shopkeeper hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a business card. That's the owner's info, Victor Manson, but he's not going to be happy about this. The officer pocketed the card. I'm confiscating these skates as possible evidence in an ongoing investigation. He turned to Robert and Helen. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like you to come with me to the station to provide a statement. As they exited the shop, Robert felt a flicker of hope for the first time in 20 years. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance they had been waiting for. Robert and Helen followed the police officer to his patrol car parked at the edge of the market. Officer Brennan, as his name tag read, suggested they drive and follow him to the station. It's not far, he assured them, just about 10 minutes down Main Street. The Fern Creek Police Station was a modest brick building with a small American flag waving above the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and professional, in stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing inside Robert. Officer Brennan led them to a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs. The skates were placed in the center of the table, sealed in a clear evidence bag. I've contacted the detective on duty, Officer Brennan explained. He'll want to take your full statement. In the meantime, I need to verify a few details. He pulled out a notepad and pen. Can you describe your daughter as she was when she disappeared? Robert cleared his throat. Emily was 12. She had shoulder-length reddish-brown hair and green eyes. She was tall for her age, about 5'3". She had a small scar on her right forearm from when she fell off our backyard fence at age 7. Officer Brennan nodded, taking notes. And when exactly did she disappear? June 15th, 1986, Helen replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. It was a Sunday afternoon, around 3. She was going to her friend Samantha's house, about half a mile away. She wanted to show off her new skates. She never made it to Samantha's house, Robert continued. We didn't realize anything was wrong until Samantha's mother called around 5, asking if Emily was still coming over. The door opened, and a man in plain clothes entered. He looked to be in his 40s, with graying hair and a serious expression. I'm Detective Marshall. He introduced himself, shaking Robert and Helen's hands. I understand you discovered a potential lead in your daughter's disappearance. Robert nodded toward the evidence bag. Those are Emily's skates. I'm sure of it. Detective Marshall sat across from them. I've contacted the authorities in Illinois. They're sending over the case files, but it may take a few hours. In the meantime, I'd like to hear the full story from you. Over the next hour, Robert and Helen took turns recounting the events surrounding Emily's disappearance. They described the massive search efforts, the volunteer teams that combed through woods and neighborhoods, the flyers they had distributed across the state and beyond. We never stopped searching, said Robert, his voice thick with emotion. I took a leave from work that first year. We set up a tip line. We hired private investigators when the police inquiry stalled. But there was never anything solid, just nothing. Detective Marshall nodded sympathetically. And now, after all this time, her skates turn up in a small Oregon town. That's quite extraordinary. Is there any way to trace how they ended up here? Asked Helen. The store clerk wasn't very helpful. We're working on that, assured Detective Marshall. I've sent another officer to look into the background of the store owner, Victor Manson. We'll also be visiting the shop tomorrow to examine their inventory records. He turned his attention to the skates, carefully removing them from the evidence bag with gloved hands. These will be photographed and logged as evidence. We'll also check for fingerprints or trace evidence, though after 20 years, that may not yield much. As he spoke, another officer entered with a folder. Detective Marshall leafed through its contents, his expression growing pensive. Mr. Manson bought Timber Treasures 18 years ago. He informed them. Before that, it looks like he moved around quite a bit. No criminal record, but not much of a paper trail either. He showed them a DMV photo of Victor Manson, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a stern expression. Do you recognize this man? Robert and Helen both shook their heads. He's scheduled to return to town in 2 days, according to his employee, continued Detective Marshall. We'll bring him in for questioning. By the time the preliminary work was completed, the sun was setting outside the station windows. Detective Marshall walked Robert and Helen to the front of the building. We'll keep investigating this lead, he promised. I've assigned an officer to revisit the store tomorrow and see if there might be any other items connected to your daughter. In the meantime, try to get some rest. As they stepped into the fading light, Robert felt a strange mix of hope and dread. The skates were real, tangible proof that somehow, somewhere, there might be answers about what happened to Emily. But what those answers might reveal after all these years terrified him more than he wanted to admit. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Robert and Helen made their way back toward the market. Despite the late hour, Robert insisted on returning to Timber Treasures. The police will handle it, Robert, said Helen, gently tugging his arm. We should go back to the Airbnb and rest. It's been an exhausting day. I need to see it again, insisted Robert, quickening his pace. There might be something else there, something we missed. Helen sighed but followed him, recognizing the determined set of his jaw. Most of the market stalls had already been packed up for the day, with vendors loading unsold goods into their vehicles. Only a few restaurants remained open, their warm lights glowing invitingly in the dusk. As they approached Timber Treasures, they saw the same clerk from earlier locking the front door. He noticed him invisibly tense, his movements becoming hurried. Look, someone else is coming out, whispered Helen, pointing to a side door Robert hadn't noticed before. A man emerged from the alley beside the shop. He wore a leather jacket and a cowboy hat pulled low over his face. But even from a distance, something about his profile looked familiar. Robert squinted, trying to place him. He looks like the man in the photo, murmured Robert. The one Detective Marshall showed us, Victor Manson. Helen frowned, but the detective said he wouldn't be back for 2 days. Why would the clerk lie to the police? They watched as the man crossed the street to a black sedan parked in front of a toy store. Another man stood by the car, and beside him was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with blonde pigtails. The man and the cowboy had approached the child first, crouching to her level. He reached out to hug her, but the girl visibly recoiled, turning her face away. When he ruffled her hair, she flinched. Something's not right, said Robert, protective instincts flaring. She's afraid of him. We can't be sure of that, Robert, said Helen cautiously. It might be nothing. Kids often get upset, especially when they're told they can't have a toy they wanted. Robert nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something sinister. The interaction seemed off, charged with an undercurrent of tension that gave him chills. They watched as the 3 figures climbed into the black car and drove away. Robert turned his attention back to the store clerk, who was now briskly walking down the street toward a bus stop. Without thinking, Robert ran after him. "Excuse me," he called. The clerk turned, his expression souring when he recognized Robert. "What now?" The cops already took what they wanted. "That man who just came out of the side door," said Robert, catching his breath. "Was that Victor Manson, the owner?" The clerk's eyes narrowed. "I don't have to answer your questions. If the police want information, they can ask me directly." "Just tell me if it was him," insisted Robert. The clerk rolled his eyes. "God, you people just can't let it go, can you?" "No, that wasn't the boss. That was his brother. Satisfied now? Leave me alone." With that, He boarded a bus that had just pulled up, effectively ending the conversation. Helen caught up to Robert as the bus pulled away. What did he say? He claims it was Manson's brother, not Manson himself, Robert replied, frowning. But why didn't he mention to the police that his brother is here if the owner is out of town? Helen shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. I don't know, Robert, but it's getting dark and we're both exhausted. Let's head back to the Airbnb and call Detective Marshall in the morning. Robert hesitated, torn between pursuing this new lead and recognizing the wisdom in Helen's words. He finally nodded, casting one last glance toward Timber Treasures before letting Helen lead him away. Tomorrow, he promised himself, tomorrow we get answers. Their Airbnb was a cozy second-floor apartment in a converted Victorian house located in a quiet residential neighborhood just a few blocks from the market. The pale blue exterior and white gingerbread trim gave it a quaint, nostalgic charm that had initially drawn Helen to book it. As they approached the building, Helen touched Robert's arm. I'm going to run to that Chinese restaurant we passed on the corner. I could use some comfort food after today. Robert nodded, pulling the apartment key from his pocket. I'll wait here. I could use a cigarette to clear my head. Once Helen had disappeared around the corner, Robert sat on the front steps of the building and lit a cigarette. He inhaled deeply, letting the smoke fill his lungs before exhaling into the darkening sky. The familiar ritual calmed him slightly, allowing his mind to process the extraordinary events of the day. Finding Emily's skates after all these years could not be a coincidence. They were a link, a tangible connection to his daughter, who had been gone for 2 decades. But what did it mean? How had they ended up in a junk store in Oregon, thousands of miles from where she had vanished? His hand trembled slightly as he took another drag. If the skates had made it this far, maybe Emily had too. And if so, maybe she was still alive. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. For 20 years, he had lived in a suspended state of mourning, unable to fully grieve a daughter who might still be somewhere. The skates had rekindled a hope he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Robert pulled out his phone and began searching for information about Victor Manson and Timber Treasures. There was not much, a bare-bones business website showing the store's exterior and its hours. A few online reviews praised its eclectic selection. Nothing personal about Manson. As he scrolled, movement across the street caught his attention. A small figure was partially hidden behind a street lamp, watching the buildings. Robert squinted through the growing darkness. It was a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Robert stubbed out his cigarette and stood. Hey there, he called gently. Are you okay? The girl stood still for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. She was thin, with dirty blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing clothes that seemed too big for her small frame. Are you looking for someone, sweetheart? Robert asked, approaching carefully. The girl looked at him with wide, serious eyes. Please, sir, she said in a small voice. Can you help save my sister? A bad man took her. Robert looked around, suddenly on alert. Was this some kind of setup? A distraction while someone broke into the apartment? But the street was quiet. No suspicious vehicles or lurking figures. What's your name? He asked, crouching to her level. Carla, the girl answered. Please, I need help. No one believes me. Who sent you here, Carla? Nobody sent me, she insisted. I'm alone. I ran away from the orphanage to find my sister. I saw her today, but was too scared to help her by myself. Robert's thoughts raced. An orphan girl, a missing sister. It mirrored his own situation too closely to be coincidence. Your sister, where did you see her? At the market, Carla said, with the man in the hat. She's scared of him, but has to pretend she's not. Robert held his breath. The little girl with pigtails, the one who flinched when the man touched her hair. This man in the hat, Robert said carefully. He's tall, balding, wears a leather jacket. Carla nodded vigorously. That's him. He took Yasmin from the orphanage. He said he adopted her, but it's not true. He's a bad man. Robert's mind spun. He thought of Emily, the stolen years, the elusive answers. And now this child stood before him, facing the same potential tragedy. Do you know where they took your sister? He asked. Carla nodded. I followed them before. I know where they go, but I can't get her out alone. Robert's conscience warred with his caution. This could be dangerous, maybe even illegal. The right thing to do was call the police. Let them handle it. But he knew the frustration of official channels, the protocols that moved too slowly while a child remained in danger. "Let me help you," he found himself saying. "Let me get my car." He sent Helen a quick message. "Taking the car out for a bit. Something came up. Use your key. Start dinner without me. I'll be back soon." As they climbed into the rental car, Robert knew he might be making a terrible mistake, but he also knew he could not live with himself if he turned away from this child's plea for help, not after spending 20 years wishing someone had been there to help his own daughter. The rental car hummed quietly as Robert followed Carla's directions, turning through Fern Creek's residential neighborhoods. The houses thinned, streetlights became scarce. "It's there," Carla finally said, pointing to a small trailer park nestled behind a grove of trees. Robert parked at the entrance and turned off the engine. In the dim light, he could make out several RVs and trailers arranged in a loose semicircle. At the far end stood a lone camper van, its windows glowing with yellow light. "That's the one," Carla whispered. Robert hesitated, his hand on the door handle. "Carla, are you absolutely sure your sister is in there? This is very serious." The girl nodded, her eyes solemn. "Please, we have to help Yasmin." Against his better judgment, Robert stepped out of the car. "Stay close to me," he instructed Carla. "And if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Understand?" They approached the camper cautiously. There was no sound from inside, no indication of how many people might be within. Robert's heart pounded as he raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. Seconds stretched into a minute with no response. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door flung open. A man stood in the doorway, lit from behind by the camper's interior lights. Robert recognized him as the other man outside the toy store. Not the one with the cowboy hat, but the one who had been waiting by the car. The man's eyes widened when he saw Carla. Then they narrowed as they shifted to Robert. "Who the hell are you, and what do you want?" "My name is Robert," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This girl came to me asking for help. She says her sister was brought here." The man's face darkened. "I'm Mike, and you got all wrong. No one's being held against their will here." He shot a furious glare at Carla. "This one's a troublemaker. Been stirring things up ever since her sister got adopted." "Adopted?" Robert repeated. Mike nodded. "That's right. Yasmin was legally adopted from Santa Catalina Orphanage by my boss. I'm just his assistant. This one," he jabbed a thumb toward Carla, couldn't handle it and started making up wild stories. "Lies! Lies!" Carla screamed, her small face twisted in fury. "You and that man took my sister." "What man?" Robert asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The girl was adopted by my boss," explained Mike with exaggerated patience. "His brother came with me to pick her up because my boss is out of town on business. Everything was done legally." Robert found himself torn between the man's plausible explanation and the raw conviction in Carla's voice. "Look," he said, trying for a reasonable tone, "I'm sure we can clear this up. Maybe I could speak to your boss or even see Yasmin for just a moment. If the sisters could talk briefly, say goodbye properly, maybe that would help everyone move on." Mike's expression hardened. "That's not possible. Yasmin isn't here. She's already been taken to her new home in another car." As he spoke, Robert heard a faint sound from inside the camper, a soft moment of silence, followed by what might have been a child's whisper. Mike quickly glanced over his shoulder, then back at Robert. "That's just my son," he said dismissively. "Look, I suggest you take that girl back to Santa Catalina before you get yourself in trouble for endangering a minor. Whoever you are, you have no right to take a child out of town without permission." "I was only trying to help," began Robert. "Help," Mike scoffed. "Kidnapping an orphan based on her wild stories? Return her to the orphanage, or next time I'm calling the police." With that, he slammed the door in Robert's face. Robert stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. The man's explanation made sense, But something about the entire situation felt off. "He's lying," insisted Carla as they walked back to the car. "Yasmin is in there, I know it." "You heard him," said Robert softly. "Your sister has been adopted. It might be hard to accept, but that—" "No," snapped Carla, stomping her foot. "That's not true. Please, you have to believe me." Robert sighed, unsure what to do next. The right thing would be to take Carla back to the orphanage like Mike had said, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Let's get back in the car," he said finally. "We'll figure this out." Back in the car, Robert turned toward Carla, who sat slumped in the passenger seat, her small face set in a stubborn frown. "Carla," he began gently, "I know you're worried about your sister, but I have to take you back to the orphanage. I could get into serious trouble for taking you like this." "Please don't take me back," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Not without Yasmin. I promised I'd protect her." Robert's heart ached for the girl. He remembered making a similar promise to Emily years ago, that he'd always keep her safe. A promise he hadn't been able to keep. "How about this?" he suggested. "Let's grab some dinner. Something nice, and then I'll take you back. I won't get you in trouble, I promise." Carla wiped her eyes on her sleeve, but said nothing. She looked defeated. Robert was about to start the car when he noticed movement near the camper. Headlights came on, illuminating the trees with a harsh white light. "They're leaving," he murmured, watching as the camper began pulling away. As it passed their parked car, Robert caught a glimpse of someone through the side window. A woman with reddish-brown hair was closing the curtains, one by one. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met through the glass. "Emily." The name escaped his lips like a whisper. It couldn't be, and yet there was something in her face, the shape, the set of her eyes, that was eerily familiar, just as he had always imagined Emily might look as an adult. The same features that had smiled from countless age-progressed photos over the years. Without thinking, Robert started the car and pulled onto the road, maintaining a careful distance behind the camper. "What are you doing?" asked Carla, sitting up straighter. "I saw someone in that camper," Robert explained, his voice taut with emotion. "A woman who might be my daughter." "Your daughter?" Robert nodded, eyes fixed on the taillights ahead. "My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago when she was 12. Just like your sister, she vanished while I thought she was safe." As they drove, Robert's phone began to ring. Helen's name flashed on the screen. He hit the speaker button. "Robert, where are you?" Helen's voice filled the car, tense with worry. "I've been waiting at the apartment." "Helen, you're not going to believe this," said Robert, the words spilling out. "I think I saw Emily. I'm following a camper right now. There's a woman inside who looks exactly like her." "What?" "Robert, where exactly are you?" Alarm was clear in Helen's voice. "Are you sure it's her?" "I'm not sure of anything," admitted Robert. "But Helen, you know how we always said Emily had the kind of face that wouldn't change much, even as she got older? This woman, it's like seeing an older version of her. Exactly how I imagined she looked now." "Robert, please be careful," Helen pleaded. "You don't know who these people are or what they're capable of. I have to follow this lead. Helen, I have to know. At least tell me where." Her voice cut out as Robert lost signal, the road taking them deeper into the rural outskirts of Furnick. For nearly an hour, they followed the camper along winding back roads, keeping a safe distance to avoid detection. Carla remained mostly quiet, occasionally pointing out turns to help him stay on their trail. Finally, the camper turned down a gravel path leading to a large house set back from the road. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was substantial, a 2-story farmhouse-style building with a wraparound porch and a detached garage. Robert turned off his headlights and pulled off the road about 100 meters from the property's entrance. From this vantage point, partially concealed by trees, he could observe the house without being immediately visible. "What are we doing now?" whispered Carla. "Why are we here?" Robert turned to her, suddenly aware of how strange and potentially frightening this must be for her. "I'm sorry, Carla. I should have taken you back to the orphanage. But you're not the only one who lost someone you love. My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago, and I think I just saw her in that camper. That's why I followed it here." Carla's eyes widened in understanding. You think the bad men took your daughter too? I don't know, Robert admitted, but I intend to find out. He turned his focus back on the house, watching as the camper parked near the front steps. Mike emerged first, followed by a woman holding a child's hand, the unmistakable girl from the toy store. Yasmin. It's her, Carla whispered, her voice filled with emotion. She is my sister. As the woman stepped into the porch light, Robert's breath caught in his throat. She was tall and slender, with the same reddish-brown hair Emily had inherited from Helen. Even from a distance, she moved with a grace that painfully reminded him of his daughter. Then, to his surprise, another figure stepped out of the van, the man with the cowboy hat. But now without it, under the bright porch light, Robert saw his face clearly. The same man he had seen in the Denby photo at the police station. It was Victor Manson. He lied, Robert muttered. Mike had said Manson was out of town, but he had been with him the entire time. And so had the girl. The realization hit him like a punch. If Manson had lied about his whereabouts, what else was he hiding? And if the woman with him was really Emily, what horrors had she endured all these years? Robert's first instinct was to storm the house and confront Manson, but reason prevailed. He was outnumbered, possibly outgunned, and he had a child with him. This needed caution. He reached for his phone to call Detective Marshall, but had no signal this far from the city. He was alone without backup or a plan. As he debated his next move, a sharp knock on the driver's window made him jump. Mike's face was pressed against the glass, his expression murderous. Stay in the car, Robert instructed Carla urgently. Lock the doors. He rolled down the window, just enough to speak. Mike, I was just about to leave. Yeah, right, Mike spat. You followed us here. What are you, some kind of stalker? Robert's mind raced for a way to de-escalate. The girl wanted to see her sister one last time. I thought we could just talk to you. You are trespassing. Mike cut him off. I do not know who you think you are, but you cross a line. Both of you come with me now. I do not think that is a good idea, Robert replied, his hand hovering near the ignition. Mike's expression darkened. That was not a request. Come willingly, or I radio the house, and we do this differently. He patted something under his jacket, the outline unmistakably a gun. Robert's blood ran cold, but he knew he had to stay calm for Carla's sake. All right, he said, slowly opening the door. We will talk. No need for things to escalate. Carla reluctantly exited the passenger side as Mike escorted them toward the house. Robert's eyes moved quickly, noting the layout vehicles and potential escape routes. You are making a mistake, Mike warned as they neared the porch. The boss would not like this. All I want is to understand what is going on, Robert replied, placing a protective hand on Carla's shoulder. Before they reached the steps, the front door swung open and Victor Manson himself appeared, his face a mask of cold fury. Who are these people? He demanded. The guy was watching the house, Mike explained. He has the brat with him. Carla, the sister. Manson's eyes narrowed, studying Robert. And who exactly are you? My name is Robert Whitmore, he answered, standing tall. I believe you have someone who belongs to me. Before Manson could reply, the woman Robert had seen earlier appeared behind him. She froze when she saw Robert, her eyes widening in shock. At that moment, Robert heard the unmistakable wail of sirens in the distance. Mike cursed and grabbed a radio. Boss, we have company. Sounds like cops. Manson's face twisted in fury. How did they find us? You brought them, he shouted at Robert. Robert shook his head. My wife must have called when I did not return. She knew I was following your van. The woman at the door continued staring at Robert, a flicker of recognition, fear, and hope dancing in her unmistakably familiar eyes. Lena, get inside, Manson barked, but the woman did not move, her gaze locked with Robert's. Emily, Robert whispered, his voice cracking. Emily Grace. Something shifted in the woman's face, a tremor at the sound of her name. The sirens grew louder, and Manson's demeanor shifted from rage to cold calculation. Mike, get everyone inside. Them too. He gestured to Robert and Carla. We will handle this my way. As they were ushered into the house, Robert saw Yasmin sitting on a sofa in the living room, her eyes wide with fear. Carla immediately tried to run to her, but Mike blocked her. The police sirens were now unmistakably close. Through the front window, Robert could see flashing lights approaching. "Victor," Mike said urgently, "what is the plan?" Manson disappeared into another room and returned moments later with a pistol. "Tell them we are armed and ready," he ordered. Robert's heart pounded. The situation was spinning out of control. The woman, Emily or Lena, stood frozen near the fireplace, her face pale. Within minutes, police cars had surrounded the property. A voice called out over a loudspeaker, identifying the Fern Creek Police Department and ordering everyone out of the house with their hands up. "Nobody moves," Manson growled, positioning himself near the window. "Mike, bring the girl." Mike grabbed Yasmin's arm roughly, pulling her toward Manson. Carla screamed and lunged forward, but Robert stopped her, knowing any sudden move could provoke violence. "Let her go," Robert said firmly. "She is just a child. This is between us adults." Manson let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You have no idea what you are involved in. You should have called the cops in the park, or stayed out of this." Outside, Detective Marshall's voice came through the speaker. "This is Detective Marshall of the Fern Creek Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out peacefully and no one will get hurt." Manson turned to the woman. "Lena, come here. Tell them everything is fine, that you are here willingly, and the girl is our newly adopted daughter." The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking between Manson and Robert. "Now, Lena," Manson barked. Slowly, she stepped toward him but stopped halfway across the room. "I cannot do this anymore, Victor," she said, her voice barely audible. "What did you say?" Manson's face darkened ominously. "I said I cannot do this anymore." Her voice was stronger now, more determined. She turned to Robert and asked, "You really are my father, right?" Robert nodded with tears welling in his eyes. "Emily, we never stopped looking for you." "Never. Lena, I warn you," Manson said, raising the gun. "Come here now." But Emily, because Robert was now sure it was her, stood firm. "No, Victor, it is over." In an instant, Manson aimed the gun at Robert. "You did this. Turned her against me." Everything happened in a blur after that. Emily lunged at Manson as he aimed at Robert. There was a struggle, the deafening crack of shot, and then another. Robert screamed in horror. Sure, he was about to witness either his death or his daughter's moments after finding her. But when the chaos cleared, it was Manson lying on the floor, blood spreading across his chest. Emily stood over him, a smaller gun in her trembling hands, her own arm bleeding from a grazed wound. Without hesitation, Robert intervened and kicked the weapons out of reach. Before Mike could react, police burst through the front door with guns drawn, shouting, "Police, everyone down, hands where we can see them." Robert dropped to his knees, pulling Carla down with him. Mike was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Medical personnel rushed in, first attending to Manson, who was still alive despite his serious wound, then to Emily. Moments later, another team arrived to tend to the two girls, securing and carefully assessing them. As paramedics bandaged Emily's arm, Robert watched from a few feet away, barely daring to believe that after 20 years he was in the same room as his daughter. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity as medical staff efficiently moved between rooms. Robert sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the treatment room, where doctors were tending to Emily's gunshot wound. He could hardly believe that after 20 years of searching, hope against hope, his daughter was alive and just behind that door. Detective Marshall approached with a grave but kind expression. "Mr. Whitmore, doctors say your daughter's injury is relatively minor. The bullet grazed her upper arm, requiring stitches but no surgery." Robert nodded, relief washing over him. "And Manson?" he asked. "He is in surgery," the detective replied. "The bullet hit his chest but missed his heart. They are working to stabilize him now." "What about the girls, Carla and Jasmine?" "They are with Child Protective Services in the pediatric wing, physically unharmed but understandably shaken." Robert rubbed his face as the day's events caught up with him. Helen had arrived at the hospital an hour earlier, frantic with worry after calling police when Robert did not return or answer his phone. Police contacted the rental company. tracked the car's GPS, and located it on Manson's property. Now she was in the cafeteria, searching for coffee for both of them. The treatment room door opened, and a doctor emerged. "Mr. Whitmore, you can see your daughter now. We have finished the stitches, and she is resting comfortably." Robert's heart raced as he entered the room. Emily lay in the hospital bed, her arm bandaged, her face pale but calm. She looked up as he approached. Her green eyes, Helen's eyes, studied him with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "Emily," he whispered, stopping at the foot of her bed, afraid to come too close and frighten her. "Dad," she replied, her voice breaking on the word. "It really is you." That single word, breaking on the word. "It really is you." That single word, Dad, broke something inside Robert. Tears he held back for hours streamed down his cheeks as he moved to her side, gently taking her uninjured hand in his. "I never stopped looking for you," he said. "Not a single day." Emily's own eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were dead. Victor told me. He said no one was looking for me anymore, that you and Mom had died in a car accident." The door opened again and Helen entered, stopping abruptly at the sight of her daughter. Emily dropped the coffee cup forgotten in her hands. "Mom," Emily's voice was small, childlike. Helen set down the cups with trembling hands and rushed to the bedside, carefully hugging her daughter's injured arm. The three of them clung to each other. 20 years of separation, dissolving into a flood of tears and half-formed words. Eventually, Detective Marshall knocked softly and entered the room. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I need to take your statement, Miss Whitmore. Or do you prefer to be called by another name?" Emily sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. "My name is Emily Grace Whitmore," she said firmly. "He called me Lena, but that was never my name." Over the next hour, Emily recounted her ordeal, her voice steady despite the horror of her story. She described how Victor Manson, a truck driver at the time, had kidnapped her while she was skating to a friend's house. "He told me there had been a robbery nearby, that it was not safe," she explained. "When I refused to go with him, he grabbed me and put something over my face, a cloth with chemicals. I woke up in his truck hundreds of miles away." She described how Manson had kept her hidden, frequently moving between states, using back roads to avoid interstate checkpoints. Sometimes she hid in a false compartment in his truck. He never stayed in one place for long, except in Fern Creek. They came back here about once a month when he checked on his business. The pawn shop. "Timber treasures?" Detective Marshall asked, taking notes. Emily nodded. "Timber treasures was his base of operations in some. He deals in stolen goods, among other things." "Why did you not try to escape?" Zrenia asked Helen gently, especially as you grew up. Emily's eyes dropped. "I did at first, but every time he caught me the punishments got worse, and he told me no one was looking for me anymore, that you two were dead. Eventually, I just stopped trying. It was easier to survive by playing along." "When did he start calling you his wife?" Zrenia asked Detective Marshall. "When I turned 18, Emily replied hollowly. "That was where he began taking me to meet his men and acquaintances, introducing me as Lena, his quiet, shy wife, but most of the time he still kept me isolated." Detective Marshall's expression darkened as he wrote in his notebook, "Emily, do you know why Victor adopted Yasmin from the orphanage? It was a legal adoption." Emily's face clouded, and she gripped the sheet with her good hand. "I do not know all the details." She paused, seeming to struggle for words. "But a few months ago, I overheard Victor talking with Mike. He said I was aging and that he wanted to—" Her voice failed. Robert placed his hand over hers, offering silent support. Emily took a deep breath and continued, saying that Victor wanted a new girl, a young woman, and told Mike he was looking for a second wife, saying he would still keep me but wanted what he called a fresh bud. Disgust and pain crossed her face as she recounted the conversation. Helen covered her mouth with tears streaming down her face. "They searched for a while," Emily went on. "Then they found Jasmine at the orphanage. I do not know how they arranged the adoption, but it could not have been legal. Victor always preferred to do things off the books. He is involved in all kinds of legal trades and dealings. He is paranoid about his identity and keeps changing depending on which town he is in." Detective Marshall's jaw tightened. We will conduct a full investigation with the orphanage and examine the records at Timber Treasures. If there was any corruption or bribery involved, we will find it. What will happen to Victor? Robert asked, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. He will face charges for Emily's kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, endangering a minor regarding Jasmine, weapons charges, and attempted murder. The detective replied, That is just the beginning. As we investigate his other operations, there will likely be additional charges. Robert felt satisfied that the man who had stolen his daughter's life would not escape justice. A knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by a CPS worker escorting Carla and Yasmin. The girls wanted to see them. The CPS worker explained, saying they had been asking for them since they arrived. Carla hurried forward, stopping just before the bed. Are you okay, Zrenia? She asked Emily. Did the bad man hurt you a lot? Emily smiled softly. I will be fine. It is just a scratch. How are you and Jasmine? Jasmine, half hid behind her sister, looked up with wide eyes. Will we go back to the orphanage? She asked in a small voice. Before the CPS worker could respond, Robert intervened. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. He turned to the worker. I know it is not possible for us to adopt them right now. We live out of state and there will be a lot of paperwork and home studies, but I would like to help arrange for them to be placed in a better facility, and I would like to provide financial support for their care and education. Emily reached out her good hand to Carla. You saved me, you know? If I had not been brave enough to seek help, I might never have found my family. Carla smiled proudly. You saved my sister, too. The CPS worker nodded. We will certainly discuss placement options for the girls, and financial support will be greatly appreciated. As night fell, the hospital room became a center of activity. Doctors came to check on Emily. Police officers arrived with updates on the investigation, and Helen made countless phone calls to relatives at home sharing miraculous news. Victor Manson had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. Mike and 3 other men associated with Manson's operation had been arrested and were providing information to authorities, revealing a network of illegal activities spanning multiple states. When the room finally quieted, Robert found himself sitting beside Emily's bed, watching her sleep. Her face, so familiar but changed by the years, looked peaceful perhaps for the first time in decades. Helen sat on the other side, her hand resting lightly on Emily's uninjured arm. 20 years, she whispered. I never thought we would see this day. Thank you for making me come on this trip, Robert whispered, his voice barely audible beyond the lump in his throat. After all the searching, all the dead ends and disappointments, Emily had been found thanks to a pair of skates in a junk store window and the courage of a little girl who never gave up on her sister. Life had taken so much from them. 20 years of birthdays and holidays, ordinary days and special moments that could never be recovered. But sitting here watching his daughter breathe, Robert knew that what mattered most was not what had been lost, but what had been found. The darkness that had wrapped their lives for 2 decades was finally lifting. Challenges lay ahead. Emily would need time and support to heal from her trauma, and they would all need to learn how to be a family again. The journey would not be easy, but for the first time in 20 years they would walk that journey together. Outside the hospital window, stars began to appear in the night sky. Robert remembered how much Emily loved to watch the stars when she was a child, how she made wishes on the first star she saw each night. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, she did not need to make a wish. The miracle she had prayed for all these years was sleeping peacefully before him, finally home where she belonged.